Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into a really fascinating take on a 3,000-year-old text. It's an idea that a huge prophecy unfolds across 3 separate chapters, telling one single story: a story of a cross, a shepherd's crook, and a crown. So let's see how this incredible hidden narrative all fits together. So, here's the big question we're tackling right up front. Is it possible for 3 completely separate ancient poems to actually be a single epic story? Is there some kind of hidden plot connecting them all that was designed to be understood way, way later? That's the core idea we're going to unpack. So the idea we're looking at is that Psalms 22, 23, and 24 are not just 3 random poems sitting next to each other. Not at all. Instead, they're meant to be read as a deliberate prophetic trilogy that tells a complete story arc, one that moves from incredible suffering to gentle salvation and finally to ultimate sovereignty. And this trilogy has a really clear 3-act structure. It all starts with Psalm 22, which is the story of the cross. From there, it moves into Psalm 23, the story of the shepherd's crook, and it all culminates in Psalm 24, the story of the crown. So let's dive right into Act 1. Okay, so Psalm 22. This is presented as the Psalm of the Cross, and it is raw, it is painful, and it's this incredibly detailed prophecy of the Messiah's suffering. According to the source, it's a shockingly accurate description of crucifixion, written hundreds of years before that was even a common practice. It kicks off with this absolutely gut-wrenching cry of complete despair. My God, why have you abandoned me? Right away, the tone is set. This is a story about deep, deep anguish and the feeling of being totally and completely alone. And that line, you probably recognize it immediately, right? The source draws a direct line from this ancient verse to the words Jesus is recorded as crying out from the cross in the New Testament. This is really the first, and maybe the most famous, link in this whole prophetic chain. But the details, well, they get even more specific and, frankly, a little eerie. A bit later in the psalm, the writer describes his enemies, get this, dividing up his clothes and rolling dice for his garments. That's not a general feeling of suffering. That is a very specific physical action. And once again, the source points to what it calls a direct fulfillment, citing the accounts of Roman soldiers literally gambling for Jesus' clothing right there at the foot of the cross. It's this level of detail that people who believe this find so powerful. Then you get this verse. The writer feels trapped, surrounded, and he describes his hands and his feet being pinned. The language here is so graphic, so visceral. It paints a clear picture of being physically held down and pierced. Now, this is where the historical context becomes absolutely fascinating. Crucifixion, that act of pinning someone's hands and feet, was a Roman method of execution. It was not a Jewish one. So for this very specific detail to show up in a Jewish psalm centuries before it became a widespread Roman practice, well, that's seen as pretty powerful evidence for its prophetic nature. So let's just quickly recap what the source is laying out for us here. You have the cry of abandonment, you have the mocking from the crowd, you have the pierced hands and feet, and you have the clothes being divided by gambling. Each one of these details from Psalm 22 is matched up with a specific event from the New Testament accounts of the crucifixion. But then, just when the suffering feels absolutely hopeless, the entire mood of the psalm just flips. It pivots on this one single phrase. You have answered me. And just like that, total despair turns into this triumphant declaration of deliverance. The sufferer knows he's been heard. And honestly, this shift is the perfect bridge to Act 2. And that brings us to our second act, Psalm 23, the Psalm of the Crook. After the agony of the cross, the change in tone is, well, it's like night and day. We've completely shifted from the perspective of the sufferer to the perspective of the shepherd. The contrast is just immediate and so stark. Look at this. Where Psalm 22 talked about being abandoned and forsaken, Psalm 23 says God is with me. Where enemies were surrounding the sufferer, now a feast is being prepared for him. The dust of death is replaced by lush pastures. It is a total 180. And of course, this psalm opens with some of the most famous and beloved lines ever written. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. The whole central image changes from a victim on a cross to a sheep being lovingly, perfectly cared for by a shepherd who gives it everything it could ever need. So what exactly does this great shepherd do? Well, the psalm breaks it down for us. He provides, he restores our strength, he guides us down the right paths, he even protects us through the darkest valley. And then, as the ultimate sign of honor, he prepares a victory feast for us right in front of our enemies. But hold on, the story isn't over yet. The suffering is done. The sheep are being cared for. But now, in the final act, Psalm 24, we get the big reveal of the shepherd's true identity. Now, it's time for the crown.
Right from the very first line, the scale just explodes into the cosmic. The psalm declares the Lord owns the earth and all it contains. We're not just talking about a single flock of sheep anymore. We're talking about universal authority and absolute ownership over everything.
And, of course, with this massive step up in status comes a much higher standard. The psalm basically asks, okay, so who is even worthy to approach a king this majestic? And the answer it gives is only those with total moral purity, people with clean hands and a pure heart. And this is where it gets really cinematic. The psalm builds to this dramatic climax. The ancient gates of a city are told to open up, to let the king enter. And a question rings out from the gatekeepers. Who is this majestic king? And the answer just thunders back. He is the Lord who is strong and mighty, the Lord who is mighty in battle. The gentle shepherd we met in Psalm 23 is now revealed to be a conquering warrior king, returning in absolute glory. All right, so let's pull back and tie all of this together. When you look at them as one single story, these three psalms map out this complete and incredible journey, moving from the lowest possible point of suffering to the absolute highest position of sovereignty. So the whole arc just clicks into place. In Psalm 22, the cross, you see the good shepherd giving his life for the sheep. Then in Psalm 23, the crook, you see the great shepherd, now risen, tenderly caring for his flock. And finally, in Psalm 24, the crown, you see that chief shepherd returning as the triumphant king of glory. It's one complete story, which really just leaves us with one final thing to think about. How does it change our perspective when we see these ancient texts not as three separate poems, but as one single unfolding prophetic story? It's a pretty powerful new lens to look through when reading a message that's 3,000 years old.